It always starts the same way, doesn't it? She looks at you not for who you are, but for who she imagines you might become. You can feel it in her eyes, can't you? That flicker. Is it hope? Or is it hunger? You think you're being seen, but you're not. You're being scanned, measured, assessed. Like a blank canvas she's eager to paint her masterpiece on. But here's the thing, the masterpiece isn't you. It never was. Carl Jung, the man who spent his life diving headfirst into the abyss of the human soul, saw this dynamic for what it really is, and he didn't dress it up in motivational fluff. Jung was surgical, precise. He called it like it was. People don't fall in love with other people. They fall in love with the idea of people, the projection, the fantasy. And here's where it gets unsettling. Most of them don't even know they're doing it. You might believe she's choosing you, seeing something unique in you, loving you for you. But what's actually happening is far more scripted. She's choosing the version of you she's created in her own mind, a character designed to play a role in a story she's been carrying around since before she even knew your name. And when you stop fitting the role, she doesn't change the story, she replaces the actor. Jung had a name for this. He called it projection. Specifically, in women, it's their animus, the inner masculine image living in the unconscious. And when that animus is immature, undeveloped, or unchecked, it turns tyrannical. It becomes this invisible force that pulls women toward reckless men and away from good, steady ones. It makes them argue without reason, moralize without accountability, dominate without wisdom. And here's the kicker. Most of them have no clue it's happening. But men, we fall for it. Because nobody ever teaches us to spot it. Nobody tells you the difference between being truly seen and being measured to see if you fit someone else's fantasy. You confuse being wanted with being understood. You confuse being chosen with being known. When she says you're different, you believe it, not realizing you're just the next face she's cast in a role she's been rehearsing since childhood. And when that fantasy eventually collapses, when your mask slips, and you can't keep up with the part you're left standing there, confused, betrayed, humiliated, asking yourself what you did wrong. But you didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being a convincing actor in someone else's movie. Jung warned about this dynamic relentlessly. He said the only way to escape this cycle is through a process he called individuation. It's the lifelong, brutal task of becoming whole within yourself. And here's the harsh truth. Most men never start that journey. We're trained from birth to chase approval, to seek validation, to let women and the world define our worth. And as long as you stay in that headspace, you'll keep playing the same role over and over again, getting replaced every time the audience gets bored. Now, individuation isn't sexy. It's not glamorous. It's not the kind of thing you post on Instagram. It's dark, it's ugly. It forces you to confront every weak, insecure, broken part of yourself you've tried to hide. It demands that you stop blaming women for not seeing you and start seeing yourself. And here's what Jung knew, what most modern men will never understand. You don't become a man by being chosen. You become a man by choosing yourself. You don't earn your worth through her affection. You earn it by standing alone, fully conscious, fully responsible, fully alive. A man who has faced his own unconscious, who knows his darkness, his weakness, his hunger can no longer be seduced by projections. He won't be a puppet in someone else's fantasy. He becomes the author of his own reality. Jung observed that the greatest tragedy of modern men isn't rejection. It's that we're so desperate to be accepted, we willingly become whatever shape we think will please others. We call it compromise, partnership, love. But Jung had a different name for it: self-betrayal. He warned that men who ignore their own psychic development become slaves to the projections of others, especially the projections of women still possessed by their unconscious animus. These men become like wet clay, molding themselves into the shapes demanded by people who don't even know their own desires. And women sense this. Oh, they sense it far more than you realize. The very thing you think makes you lovable, your obedience, predictability, availability, is the reason she loses attraction. Why? Because feminine instinct, Jung said, isn't drawn to comfort. It's drawn to mystery, to challenge, to the man she cannot fully define or control. The moment you make yourself fully known, without boundaries, without a backbone, you don't become more lovable. You become invisible, replaceable. And yet, here's the paradox that keeps most men enslaved. You fear being alone more than you fear being fake. You'd rather lose yourself than lose her. You'd rather keep playing a role than face the terror of standing alone, without applause, without validation. But until you do, until you learn to embrace solitude, you'll never be free. Jung said individuation is a path for the few, not because it's exclusive, but because it's brutal. It requires you to die before you die, to let every false identity, every cheap performance, every carefully constructed image burn away. And most men won't do it. Most can't. But if you do, if you start walking that path, something strange happens. You begin to see things you can't unsee. You recognize the masks people wear, the roles they play, the lies they tell themselves just to feel safe. And when you try to tell them what you see, they'll mock you, call you cold, arrogant, too serious, too distant. But you're not the problem. You're the mirror. And people hate the mirror when it shows them something they don't want to face. Jung spent his life studying this, how most people are terrified to confront their own shadow, the dark, rejected parts of their psyche they pretend aren't there. And women, Jung warned, often live in cultures that reward them for avoiding this inner confrontation. They're told they're pure, emotional, intuitive, that they're complete just as they are. But Jung didn't buy it. He wrote that one of the greatest dangers for women was their unconscious animus, the inner masculine voice speaking with false certainty, false authority, and false moral superiority. And unless a woman faces and integrates this inner masculine force, she becomes a prisoner of it. She projects it onto every man she meets. She blames them for the very war she refuses to fight within herself. And you think you're her savior. You think you'll be the exception. That if you'll love her hard enough, perform well enough, prove yourself loud enough, she'll finally choose you for you. But that's not how projection works. See, projection isn't conscious. She's not sitting there scheming, plotting how to use you. That's what makes it so dangerous. It feels real. It feels sincere. And to her, in that moment, it is. She genuinely believes you're the man she's been waiting for. The one who'll finally make her feel safe, seen, alive. But she's not seeing you. She's seeing the part of herself she hasn't integrated, the unfinished business of her own soul. And you mistake that intensity for love. You confuse obsession with devotion. You think you've finally been chosen, not realizing you've just stepped onto a stage in a play that's been running long before you arrived. That's why so many relationships start on fire and end in ashes. You're not being rejected for who you are. You're being discarded for failing to be who you never were. And here's where Jung gets brutal. He warns that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. You'll think you keep falling for the wrong women, or that you're just unlucky in love. But what's really happening is this. Your unexamined hunger to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen, makes you blind. It makes you easy prey for the projections of people who haven't faced themselves. That's not romance. That's trauma bonding. And most men never wake up to it. They just keep moving from one woman to the next, repeating the same patterns, living out the same scripts, until bitterness calcifies where their hope used to be. They start believing nonsense like all women are the same. They grow cynical, detached. But they never ask the real question. Why was I so desperate to be chosen in the first place? Because here's the truth. Most men will choke on before they'll ever speak it out loud. They don't fear being unloved. They fear being irrelevant, invisible, forgotten. And as long as that terror rules you, you'll keep trading pieces of yourself for scraps of attention. You'll keep letting women and the world define what makes you a man. But Jung believed in something better. He believed that a man could become whole, not by seeking approval, not by collecting trophies, not by performing for a crowd, but by descending into his own depths, by confronting his own shadow, by wrestling with the parts of himself he was taught to fear. And when a man does this, when he no longer needs to be chosen, when he no longer fears solitude, he becomes dangerous, not because he's reckless, but because he's free. Free from the need for permission, free from the tyranny of public opinion, free from the invisible scripts that keep lesser men obedient. Jung wrote that such a man becomes a force of nature, not in the cartoonish alpha male sense, but in the way ancient storms command respect, in the way uncharted forests provoke awe, in the way unexplained silences make people uneasy. Because people sense it. They sense when a man no longer needs them. And paradoxically, it's in that moment, when you no longer crave to be chosen, that you become undeniable. And here's the final twist most men never expect. The women you used to chase will come back. Not because you've changed to please them, but because you've changed to claim yourself. They'll sense the difference. They won't be able to name it, but they'll feel it in your presence, in your silence, in your refusal to perform. And whether they stay or not won't matter, because you'll have finally chosen yourself. That's the kind of man Jung was talking about. Not the sanitized performative masculinity we see plastered all over social media, but something raw, sovereign, dangerous, whole. A man who no longer mistakes being desired for being respected. A man who no longer confuses attention with affection. A man who no longer offers up his soul in exchange for the fleeting warmth of someone else's gaze. Jung knew this path wasn't for everyone. In fact, he believed most people would actively avoid it, because it demands everything. It leaves nothing untouched, no fantasy unbroken, no lie unchallenged. But for the few who walk it, it offers something no relationship, no approval, no applause can match. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be exactly who you are, without apology, without explanation, without need. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never trade it for anyone's affection again. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because once you claim that kind of freedom, you start to see the world differently. You see how much of society runs on unspoken agreements. How people trade authenticity for acceptance, how men posture, how women perform, how everyone's quietly begging not to be alone with themselves. You notice the way conversations are padded with lies, the way people cling to their identities like life rafts, the way they'll defend their illusions even as those illusions bleed them dry. And you realize something brutal but necessary. Most people don't want the truth. They want reassurance. They want to be told they're good enough, that their heartbreak meant something, that their suffering was noble, that love will save them. But love doesn't save anyone who won't save themselves. And this is why Jung said the most terrifying thing a man can do is confront his own soul. Because you won't like what you find. You'll see your cowardice, your envy, your manipulations. The moments you betrayed yourself just to be liked. The times you settled for less because you were too scared to ask for more. And if you're honest, truly honest, you'll realize you can't blame women for this, or your parents, or your culture, or your past. You handed yourself over, piece by piece. And the work now isn't to become some invincible alpha caricature. It's to gather those lost pieces, to reclaim them, to own your hunger, your loneliness, your rage, your tenderness, all of it. Because a man who owns his shadow isn't controlled by it. He doesn't lash out to prove his worth. He doesn't fold to avoid conflict. He doesn't need to be adored to feel alive. He just is. And that's why people feel something in the presence of a man like that. Not because he's loud, not because he's ruthless, but because he's whole. There's no leak in his foundation, no apology in his stance, no desperation in his gaze. And whether people love him, hate him, desire him, or fear him, it won't matter, because he's already chosen himself. And here's the irony. The moment you no longer need to be chosen is the moment you actually become the kind of man worth choosing. Not by the world, not by a crowd, but by the rare few who can recognize what they've spent their whole lives pretending not to need. A real one. That's the work. And if you can hear this, if some part of you feels it deep in your gut, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready. Not to be liked, not to be wanted, not even to be loved, but to be free. And brother, that changes everything.